Welcome, friends, to the writings and teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. My name is Nayaswami Hriman, and I'd like to talk to you today about intuition. Yogananda had several original written lessons on how to develop intuition, and intuition is that he described as the soul's power to know God. Well, it's much more than that. I suppose that would work if you consider God as everything and in all things. Then intuition is that power by which we know, simply by which we know what to mention all things. We know what we need to know. I don't necessarily need to know how to create a symphony or how to develop Einstein's theory of relativity. But the kinds of things that you or I need to know, when they come by intuition, they are true. Now, intuition has different names and there are different meanings, especially. Agama is a Sanskrit word for intuition, but more importantly to you and I, who aren't students of Sanskrit, is the fact that many people, in fact most people, do not know what intuition is. In fact, worse than that, in our culture, our scientific, rational-minded culture, we people in general, tend to not trust what they call intuition, which is usually mixed up with feelings and emotions and what I really want, the unexamined biases by which we make certain statements. We have opinions and points of view about what we think is going to happen, or about decisions that we make are usually through the filter of our subconscious tendencies and inclinations and desires and fears. And so intuition gets a very bad rap. But it does exist, and it's helpful to understand what it is. And for those of us on the spiritual path, and those of us particularly who are meditators, intuition is the name of the game. Intuition, as Yogananda called it, being the power to know God, is exactly what we're seeking. So you could put intuition and developing your own intuitive faculty, which is really, has been called, and is really much more like the sixth sense, is essential. So for those of us watching this who are meditators, which I assume is pretty much everybody, intuition is the name of the game. It's the channel, like the telephone number, to the Akashic record, to the Holy Spirit, to the Christ consciousness, to the divinity itself. This is the medium. When you think of somebody who's a medium and channels astral entities, intuition is the medium by which we reach that which is true. And what could be more true than God? So I want to share with you some of the notes from one of Yogananda's earliest lessons. In his advanced course on Practical Metaphysics, the third lesson was entitled simply, How to Develop Intuition Consciously. And he begins with a quote from, I think it's verse 7 of the first book in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, in which Patanjali lists as the sources of knowledge, sense perception, inference, meaning reason, and agama, or intuition. Now, agama, he goes on to explain, intuition traditionally in the Yoga Sutras has been interpreted by most commentators to be a reference to scriptural authority. But that, Yogananda says, that's not what agama really means. Agama, intuition, as opposed to scriptural authority, which has to be you have to read it, you have to use logic and reason to interpret it, and if you're lucky, some intuition comes into your understanding of a scriptural statement, like blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. What does it mean to be pure of heart? What does it mean to see God, who has no form? But nonetheless, agama here in Patanjali, he says, does not mean scriptural authority, the common interpretation. It means true intuition. Now, it's very much misunderstood, as I said earlier. He acknowledges that, because after all, intuition is also just a word. And so what does the word mean? So there's that misunderstanding. But also there's the intuitive, there's the energetic misunderstanding about what comes to us is intuition. What comes to us, is it true? I had a hunch. What is that? Is it true? And so he goes on to write, errors are made by people who fail to distinguish between a real hunch of intuition, meaning a lightning bolt of an intuitive perception that comes, and their convictions based on their intellectual commitments, intellectual thought, or even superstition, or past experience, the way it's always been, that kind of thing. And so he goes on to talk about convictions, self-sufficiency, or in other words, we're limited in one given lifetime to life's experiences and the habits we've developed. But he says a real intuition, as such, can never be wrong, or it's not intuition. So that definition doesn't really help us, but it does help us clarify what we're talking about. And it isn't just firmly believing in something or being stubbornly committed to it. He makes an important point. Intuition, he says, is not combative. It doesn't contradict. It's it's not argumentative. You might say when it comes to you, it has this sense of rightness. It's just self-evident to you on a feeling level, not on an emotional level. And it makes sense. And what really makes it true is the fact that it doesn't go against your sense perceptions or your reason or your common sense. It might be new, and it might defy what you've experienced in the past, but when it comes to you and you contemplate it, it makes sense, okay, on its own terms. It doesn't contradict or, as I say, it's not argumentative. It connects us with the soul, and then he classifies intuition according to different levels. He says there's crude intuition. He doesn't explain that, but I've seen this in people who are otherwise not notably intelligent, but in fact, we could say in terms of people without any book learning. You might think of somebody in a tribal situation, but they have a kind of intuition about the world around them. It's almost instinctual, particularly if it's based on, nature, in which case it can be an instinctual intuition. But I'm thinking more of people that I run into. They're not particularly wise or even necessarily good people, but they have this sort of crude intuition where they can see somebody who's trying to con them, let's say. Okay, so it's kind of a street level intuition. Then you have the kind of intuition that individuals develop in the sort of vertical of their trade or business or their profession. They just get good at something, and so they develop an intuition, a feeling that guides them in their work, and they have a certain level of success. But the highest form of intuition is won by meditation and has a certain purity and clarity about it that he doesn't say this, but it's the pure of heart. In other words, a person who leads a good life, a clean life, as we say, a clear life, a self-giving life, have devotion, that sort of clarity and purity allows the sixth sense to operate openly, you might say. Okay, Then he gives, and I'm going to close with this, several steps of how to develop intuition. 1, use your common sense. Apply and exercise your common sense. Every day, number 2, introspect about what you did that day. Analyze your own habits, your own opinions. So be more mindful, more self-aware. 3, think deeply about issues in your life or issues, in the world around us. Calmness. Calmness is essential to being able to keep open that channel of intuition in order to drop into your mind intuitive insights. And best of all, he says, by meditation. And this last part I'll end here. This is the most important. By holding to the calm after effects of your meditation practices, sitting in the silence, being still after you practice a technique of watching the breath or using a mantra, Kriya Yoga, Om technique, then sit in the silence and be still and know. You see, intuition is the knowing. Okay, great souls, that's it for today.